Welcome to this Keynote plenary conversation, working together to promote freedom of religion or belief in a divisive world. My name is Brett Scharffs, and I am the director of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at Brigham Young University Law School. We are very excited about the program we have prepared for you today. Francesco Di Lillo will interview Susan Kerr, Senior Advisor on Freedom of Religion or Belief at the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, known as the OSCE. She'll not only talk about her work at the OSCE, but will also draw upon her rich experience promoting freedom of religion and belief through her work in non-governmental organizations. They'll discuss how partnerships in this field can help address some of the pressing problems of religious discrimination and persecution, and look at some of the challenges and opportunities that collaborations provide. Dr. Kerr has over 15 years of European public affairs experience. Prior to working at ODIHR, Susan engaged in consultancy work, including for the Forb Learning Platform. She has also led the Europe office of the Christian Solidarity Worldwide, a human rights organization that specializes in freedom of religion or belief. She has also served on the board of coordinators of the European Platform Against Religious Intolerance and Discrimination, EPRID, and has worked in different roles within the European Parliament. She is a senior research fellow at the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation and a member of the board of mentors of Polylogos Association. Susan holds a PhD in Peace Studies from the University of Bradford and postgraduate degrees in business administration from Durham University, international politics from the Free University of Brussels, and in modern European languages and European Union studies from the University of Edinburgh. The discussion with Dr. Kerr will be conducted by Mr. Francesco Di Lillo, Director of the EU and International Affairs Office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, headquartered in Brussels, Belgium. Francesco previously worked in church public affairs in Frankfurt, Germany, and he trained in public affairs and public information with Cyprus with the Italian Embassy, the United Nations Development Program, and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. He holds a master's degree in Theory of Communications from the University of Rome, Tre, and also holds a master's in International Relations and Human Rights Protection from the Società Italiana per l'Organizzazione Internazionale. After the conclusion of this discussion, the Latin America and Caribbean regional session will begin. You can join this session by logging on in the usual manner through our center's website. Thank you, and Francesco, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Scharffs, for your kind introduction. Dear friends, welcome to this keynote plenary conversation titled Working Together to Promote Freedom of Religion or Belief in a Divisive World of the 28th Annual International Law and Religion Symposium organized by the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at Brigham Young University. My name is Francesco Di Lillo, and I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Scharffs and his team for the honor to conduct this session. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Susan Kerr, Senior Advisor on Freedom of Religion or Belief of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. As mentioned by Professor Scharffs, rather than a formal speech, we have agreed on an interview type of discussion during which we will touch on Susan's work, OSCE's priorities and collaborations with religious groups and civil society, and much more. Therefore, without further ado, let's get into it. So, Susan, please tell us about your current position at the OSCE and ODIHR. What do you see as current opportunities and needs for freedom of religion or belief, or FORB, in the OSCE region? And how do you envision your role and that of the OSCE in promoting FORB?
Well, maybe I should just start with a little bit about the OSCE. I'm sure that many will have heard about our election monitoring work, but the OSCE also has a rich body of commitments that cover a broad range of human rights, including freedom of religion or belief. And it also has mechanisms in place to assist participating states in implementation. The OSCE is, of course, a security organization, and yet it has a very rich, comprehensive approach to security, which we refer to as the human dimension at the core of security alongside politico-military aspects. And I think that it really makes that link clear in the commitments. For example, that the freedom of religion or belief is explicitly linked to security. In the OSCE region, as elsewhere, there's of course a need for freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief to be further actualized and to become reality for those living within the area. And the challenges are various. In some cases, we see legislation that is not in line with international standards. In others, we see a simple lack of awareness about what this right is and what it actually entails. It may sound obvious to somebody like you, Francesco, who works on this right, but freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief is about protecting people, not protecting religions. It's not just for the religious, it's also for people who do not have a faith. It's not about protecting patriarchy. It's not about illiberalism. It's not just good for people who live in the West. It's not just for one group. It is not a standalone right. It's not about protecting the majority, and it's not just a minority right. It's not about who is the most persecuted and about presenting data that shows that. It's not a naive liberal concept that allows extremism to flourish or that condones religious hate speech. Quite the opposite. And yet these are all points that we regularly hear and need to discuss over and over again. So there remain significant challenges, but also significant opportunities are present. 20 years ago, we didn't see the plethora of offices and posts working specifically to advance this right that we see today. Freedom of religion or belief is also being increasingly mainstreamed into different initiatives, and its relevance to areas such as peace building or development are increasingly understood. We now see increasing research and publications that show, for example, how men and women can experience violations in different ways. And all of this knowledge can help those devising projects to tackle discrimination or human rights violations in this area to better design their actions, be it civil society or be it state actors. Now, as ODIHR Senior Advisor on this right, freedom of religion or belief, I have the privilege of working to advance it. I may be biased, but I think that ODIHR does have an important role to play in promoting the right, and it does so in a number of ways. We reach out to communities across the OSCE area to try to understand what is happening, including through our missions. ODIHR offers legislative support upon request to review draft or existing legislation in the area of freedom of religion or belief. We also work to advance the understanding of this right and have produced a number of publications that specifically look at areas such as freedom of religion or belief and security, or the legal personality of religious and belief communities. We hold events that bring together different experts or civil society actors or policymakers to discuss areas of concern or opportunities. We conduct project work and engage in capacity building of a wide range of stakeholders. And I should perhaps note that ODIHR also has a panel of experts in the area of freedom of religion or belief who assist us in our work. And I should perhaps also mention that partnerships with other organizations are crucial in assisting us as we seek to assist participating states in the implementation of their commitments in this area.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. This was a very thorough introduction to your work and the work of ODIHR, and some of the issues that you mentioned we'll definitely tackle during our conversation. Let me ask you now, given your rich background working on 4 issues with human rights organizations, I must mention your work with your previous work with Christian Solidarity Worldwide and your contribution to APRID, the European Platform Against Religious Intolerance and Discrimination. I still remember those good times working on together on these issues here in Brussels. Now, this year's symposium topic is finding collaborative solutions to promote freedom of religion or belief. So can you tell us some about the types of collaborations you have seen and been part of, and what makes for effective partnerships in the field of freedom of religion or belief?
That's a great question, and it's a very important topic. I just mentioned at ODIHR, of course, we very much value partnerships with a wide range of stakeholders working on freedom of religion or belief. And even those who aren't, but where we see that maybe they should be. We try to reach out to engage others in this area. It may sound obvious to say this, but of course, no person or office is an island. Cooperation is essential to everyday life. Even tasks where we think perhaps that external input is unneeded are often influenced or rely upon others' previous or future actions. For quite a long time, freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief was seen as an orphaned right, the ugly duckling. I think that critical mass in countering such negative misrepresentations of the right are crucial. But also, where we see the space for civil society shrinking, this can be very discouraging for those working on the right. I think of human rights defenders who feel like they're isolated, and it's so important for us to connect the dots and show them that they're not, that there are others working on the right, that we can learn from each other, that we can share good practices, help shed bad practices, and avoid reinventing the same wheel, but pool resources. I've met a number of people at events who were delighted to know that I worked for an organization that could offer them training or support them in the advocacy of what was happening in their local contexts. This was very, very much what I appreciated whilst part of EPRIT. We all represented different organizations with different foci perhaps, but we all agreed on the importance of freedom of religion or belief from our various standpoints. And we all brought different expertise to the table. By working together, we were able to understand different perspectives, to learn about FORB-related issues that we were not covering ourselves, to pool the resources of the expertise, I would say, from the different organizations that were part of EPRIT into the organization of events, into perhaps putting out joint statements or letters to present the message that freedom of religion or belief is for everybody, that it's not a special interest of one religious group, that it's not just a kind of hobby horse of a particular NGO, but that it's a fundamental human right. And this was all the clearer when we spoke with a common voice. Of course, civil society organizations such as CSW are pivotal actors in identifying who is being left behind, in advocating for them, in undertaking programs, offer support, in filling gaps in data, in identifying regional or wider trends. And again, this all takes cooperation, from information gathering, local partnerships, informing others, offering training where there are needs to be met, empowering other organizations by sharing experience. Where such organizations are involved in peace and reconciliation work, they can stand up for the marginalized and support their voices in international fora, which can often seem like an impossibility to local communities. Francesco, obviously you know who to pick the phone up to, but it's not necessarily that reality for everybody in a local community who's struggling maybe with certain issues in the area of their religious freedom.
Thank you, Susan. This brings me to my next question that has to do again with collaborations. Affecting lasting change in freedom of religion or belief is a challenge that engages an enormous range of players. You mentioned in your last reply, you hinted to that. Players that go from NGOs to religious leaders, interfaith groups, government, academic, and intergovernment organizations. How would you characterize the roles that these groups and organizations can play in bringing about improvement in freedom of religion or belief on the ground? And what are important points of intersection in their work?
There's a lot that I could say in response to this, but I will try to be concise. Each actor that you've mentioned has a different mandate or role in society. Of course, states are duty bearers. Some of the other actors you mentioned, we could say, are moral duty bearers. And each has a different ability to affect change, to influence others, depending on a number of different factors. Perhaps the data they have at their fingertips, the resources that they have, the research that they produce or have access to, their seriousness on the topic, how well they're able to understand the right, their rationale for engaging on the topic, I think that there are a number of different factors then that would come into play. And each actor also has their own networks. They reach into different structures and contexts. And of course, some people wear multiple hats at once. For example, I think of religious leaders that I've met who are also academics, or who perhaps work for an NGO, or founded a charitable organization that also looks at freedom of religion or belief. Religious leaders can have standing within their community that enables them to reach out and educate people within their communities that others may be unable to reach. I've spoken recently with various representatives of religious communities who've told me how they encouraged vaccination within their community against COVID, for example. And in this situation, they were able to leverage the trust of members of their community and the authority that they have within those communities and mobilize members to act. Now, some of the other actors that you mentioned there would not have had that same level of trust and would not have been able to maybe mobilize the same actors from within these communities to be vaccinated. Academics, of course, can provide research that can feed into the work of NGOs or policymakers. In terms of intersections, then I think it comes back to finding the common motivating factor, which is human well-being or human suffering, two sides of a coin perhaps, where there's a lack of freedom of religion or belief, let's say human suffering. But it's also about practicing what is preached, if you'll excuse the turn of phrase. If we're speaking about the importance of respecting everybody's freedom of religion or belief, of respecting and protecting everyone's right to engage in the public sphere, then we have to take that seriously ourselves. We need to be fair and non-discriminatory in our approach. We should not offer freedom of religion or belief to some, seeing them as higher class citizens perhaps, and not to others, as this will ultimately undermine the whole endeavour. Sorry, there's a lot more I could say, but I think I've kind of answered.
No, that's excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. By the way, I mean, if we had hours, I would like to keep you here for much longer, but of course, we are limited by the time. Let's move into an aspect of forward work that is especially important on the ground. But I mean, it's important in all aspects, but especially on the grounds. And it's about freedom of religion or belief and interreligious partnerships. Now, this can be a sensitive field for some individuals or groups. Partnering and collaboration can be seen as giving up or watering down one's own religious commitment, or in case of states and intergovernmental groups, giving up similar commitments to neutrality and impartiality. So now all groups will have limits on what they feel comfortable supporting or espousing. How can groups with different core commitments work together in promoting human rights and freedom of religion or belief?
Another great question, I would say. You're absolutely right that it can be a very sensitive area for some individuals and groups, especially I would say where they understand the need that they have for freedom of religion or belief for their own, but maybe fear what that could entail if everyone had the right. And I think that comes back to what is a fundamental misunderstanding of what freedom of religion or belief entails, that it is not a right that is some sort of wishy-washy ideal, but it meets basic human needs. And I think an important role that each of the actors that you mentioned in the previous question has really is to work to break down what are often prejudices and stereotypes about different religious communities. I think if we only look at what makes us different, we'll never be able to act towards peace in society. And we are all different. Even within a religious or belief group, we are different and we have differences of opinion. Within an organization, it's this ability to differ that protects absolutely in the form of freedom of thought. And it's the manifestation of that is also protected, although obviously with limitations. And I think it's important that we all recognize each other's humanity. and that we don't see people by the labels of their religious, ethnic, or other identities, but ultimately we see other people as human beings. As I mentioned, that we all have basic human needs that must be met. And these human rights respond to some of these basic human needs. And when we view people in that way, perhaps it's easier to find the common points, to find those common sore points. None of us, maybe perhaps living in a community like that there is a lot of litter lying around on the street. This is a common sore point that we all have, and that maybe we could all act on together, that people could come together and act on. I think as well, yes, it's very important to tackle issues of perception, also within one's own community. And here again, I think religious leaders have a very important role to play. Reaching out to the other. I've seen wonderful examples of communities even attending each other's ceremonies, just to show that, just to show that they are there for those from other communities, that standing in solidarity when perhaps there have been attacks against religious sites, and putting out statements condoning those attacks of sites of other religious communities. I think as well, you mentioned, I'm going back to the question, coalition building. And I think, really it is about finding common shared principles. And there are many amongst actors on FORB. It's about uniting around these common shared principles, whilst acknowledging, I would say, some of the inequalities and asymmetries in the power status of the different actors coming to the table, and looking at ways to include people who are perhaps marginalized, and making sure that their voices are present in discussions. It's about making that space for each other, and paying attention to managing conflicts within that in a respectful way, where voices are able to be expressed without automatically being shot down, but actively listening to each other. I think that these are some of the points that I would raise around that.
Thank you, Susan. Let me ask you one question specific to this. I mean, you said something at the very beginning, which I find very inspiring in terms of really clarifying what FORB is. As you mentioned, many people who are not working on a daily basis on freedom of religious belief think that freedom of religious belief is all about going to church, or being able to say that you belong to a certain faith community or another one. Whereas, as you mentioned, is actually about protecting people and their individual rights to worship or not to worship, and not organizations. And so, which is kind of sometimes counterintuitive, right? Because but then you want to bring organizations together to do interfaith activities. But this is really a perspective that is important, that I've learned myself over the years as I came naive on the topic. However, I wanted to ask you about the OSCE work and your office work. Do you have any platform, or do you provide any specific type of activities to encourage interfaith or interreligious dialogue?
Yes, we do. I would say that in our project work, in our consultations on various aspects of freedom of religion or belief, we would always seek to include as many different backgrounds as possible and bring them to the table to discuss common issues. Also, I would note, of course, I work specifically on the human right to freedom of religion or belief, but within ODIHR, we have other colleagues who work in the area of tolerance and non-discrimination. And I know that this would also be a theme in many of their activities and projects and capacity building seminars, as it is of ours.
So within the scope of the broad range of human rights, there are many opportunities for churches, religious organizations, and non-confessional organizations to engage with OSCE and absolutely, you very much would encourage it. Yes, encourage. I think
course, one format that the OSCE offers are the Human Dimension Implementation meetings. And unfortunately, there will not be one this year, but we do hope that there will be one next year, which bring together civil society actors, including actors such as yourself, Francesco, people who represent different religious affiliations, and can then voice their concerns or their points of view on the right to freedom of religion or belief and other human rights. And I find that very important, also just in alerting participating states and ODIHR to various issues from across the OSCE region that we may not otherwise hear about.
Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, because of course, different religious communities have different areas of concern and different perspectives and different relationships with states. So all of this, of course, it's important for us to be aware of as we work on the area of freedom of religion or belief, so that we do so well.
Thank you so much. So now this brings me to the last question, and so we are going to wrap up afterwards. But what are some of the pressing concerns in the field of freedom of religion or belief, both in the OSCE region and more globally? In your opinion, what sorts of partnerships would you love to see that could make a difference in addressing such concerns? And on the other end, what kinds of collaborations aren't being done or done well that could make a significant contribution?
Okay, so you asked about pressing concerns and...
Susan, but I think that this question is your opportunity to inspire our audience.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. I would say that there are a number of pressing needs in the area of freedom of religion or belief. And I think that a main one that I raised before is basic awareness raising of what this right is. I'm aware that listening to this interview will be a range of actors from different backgrounds and from many of the backgrounds that you spoke of before. And I would say that each person should consider themselves part of a jigsaw that together can make a beautiful image of what freedom of religion or belief is from their standpoint. So from the standpoint of academia, you can bring data, you can bring research about what really is happening on the ground in a number of countries, or perhaps in just raising awareness of different elements of the right to freedom of religion or belief that are misunderstood. It's quite a complex right. I mean, on the surface, there's a very basic message, but there are many different ways in which the right is manifested. And there are many different ways in which discrimination occurs, on the grounds of freedom of religion or belief, and that violations occur. So I think, academia, academics, you have a major role to play here in making sure that there is data and research. I think international organizations, we have a platform where we can bring together different actors to discuss some of these concerns, to discuss the pressing issues, reaching out to participating states and member states of the different organizations, awareness raising, building their capacity, building the capacities of their law enforcement agencies or civil servants, also of religious and belief communities. I think just on different areas of the right as it applies to them, of different ways that they could be sensitive to the right, different ways that they can engage perhaps with religious or belief communities. I think there are a number of roles that we can and we do play, but maybe we could do even more. As I mentioned, there are a plethora of new posts that have cropped up over the past years in the area of freedom of religion or belief. I think this is a very welcome development. I think it will help to raise awareness that there are issues that we need to address across the OSCE region, but also overseas, and will raises that up the political agenda. I would say that Faith-based organizations also have a major role to play in educating their members of churches, of religious organizations, of belief communities, about the importance of this right to them. I think, for example, of humanists, you mentioned before, just knowing that the right is not just for religious people can be a revelation to some, but is very important. We have seen the rights of humanists being violated on the grounds of religion or belief. We see hate crimes. We're monitoring hate crimes, of course, also within ODIHR, and we've seen a variety of different forms of hate crimes. So also equipping law enforcement, but also civil society to know how to monitor and report is very important, and that's also a role that civil society can play. I think so. What I'm trying to say really is that we can all, I think, all of us have a role to play. And I would encourage everybody to get involved at whatever level they are at, whether it be at the grassroots or at a different level in the conversation. I would say that there is a chair, and should be a chair for you, whether you are a man or a woman, whether you're young or old. Don't be put off by interlocutors that you may see, but recognize that you should have a voice in this conversation and assume it.
Thank you so much, Susan. These were wonderful words of encouragement. Myself, I took a lot of notes, and I'm sure that this conversation offered a lot of insights for many that are watching to take away and use in their own daily work. Thank you so much, Susan. Again, this was and all the best to your work as senior advisor. So this was a keynote conversation with Dr. Susan Kerr, Senior Advisor on Freedom of Religion or Belief of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. Thank you very much for having been with us today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to have this conversation.